What's up, faithful? You're listening to another episode of the 49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast, a part of the Odyssey Network. I'm Brian Rennick. He's Al Sacco, and we are joined by not just friend of the show, I'm going to say brother of the show, Jason Aponte. The 49ers had a press conference. Al was very excited, very informative. Biggest news coming out of that press conference, Kyle Shanahan's mustache from the CMC wedding is gone, but it has been glued to Nick Bosa's face because he's showing up with a mustache. Outside of that, I don't know that we learned a whole lot. Jason, thank you for joining us, man. How are things going with you?
Happy to be here. Forget friend of the show, friends in real life. Like that's the best part, you know. Fellow Yankee fan Al and Brian is also a 49ers enthusiast. So yeah, it's good to be here with you guys, and talking about training camp is really fun, right?
And unlike Al, who lives on the East Coast, he and I have never met in real life. Jason does live on the East Coast, but he and I have met and hung out in real life. So yeah, we gotta make that, we gotta change that, Al. I don't know if that it probably means that it will be here in California, I would assume.
Flights are expensive, man. Flights are expensive. If Odyssey wants to put me on a plane, I'll be there. Listen,
Same.
I love having Aponte on the show. Like you said, we're friends. I love talking Niners with him. I don't want to overshadow anything right now, but you guys, I still have a lot of questions. We just had a press conference. I get Brandon Ayuk is the story. We've been doing this a long time. You have to ask Brandon Ayuk questions. It's the story. But they were asked and asked and asked and asked. And my issue is this. It's not that you asked about Ayuk. You got to ask about Ayuk. He's the top story. But there are so many other things going on that I feel like just didn't even get addressed. We don't know anything. So question number 2, let's have an Al Sacco press conference right now. I'm going to ask you guys stuff, I guess. And then you could, I guess, just hop in and say with whatever you feel. Because I feel like there are important questions that should have been asked, and not, hey, Kyle, you shaved your mustache? Who gives a shit? That's the last question we asked. Kyle, you shaved your mustache? Who cares? Who gives a shit if Kyle Shanahan shaved his mustache? This is what I care about. Question 1 in the Al Sacco press conference. Tyson Campbell, a cornerback who plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars, just signed a 4-year, $76.5 million deal with over $53 million guaranteed. Kyle and John, Brian and Jason, what does that mean for Lenore and Ward? And have you had any discussions with them yet about a contract extension, because they're free agents after this year?
Brian, are you going to be John and you want me to be Kyle?
Yeah, let's do it. Yes.
All right. Well, you know, we really like those guys and we want to have them in the building. I mean, it's been a long time since we've had, a duo as good as them. But, we'll worry about that next year, and we're just going to go to war with the guys that we have here.
Yeah, it's, I love those guys. I have a personal relationship with each one of them. And, the business side is the business side. And I'm just excited to have both those guys on the field for 2024.
So real question, though, this contract comes out, the prices just skyrocketed for your 2 corners. Is this not something we should be talking about, at least with the second question in the press conference?
I think it's, I understand your frustration with, the media members and everything, but John and Kyle, they are chefs, but what they're chefing is nothing burgers and word salads. And you don't really decipher anything. Like, I think we spent a lot of time during like the whole pick at 3 thing, deciphering body language and taking whatever like little clips. For the most part, aside from like occasionally Kyle being too blunt in a certain situation, like when he flat out said no about Cameron Latu being the tight end too, like it's just not even like leaving the door or anything like that for that. But for the most part, I think some of the media members are just understand that they're not going to get anything from these things, and they really just don't give out a lot of information. But it is a question that needs to be asked. But the funny part is, the way that I answered it as Kyle, the way that Brian answered it as John, that's exactly what they were going to say. And I think we could have set our watch to that.
Yeah, I think ultimately what that Tyson Campbell contract means is that you're only signing one of those guys, whether it be Lenore or Ward. And I would assume it would be Lenore as the younger player. Because if I'm Charvarius Ward and a guy like Tyson Campbell gets that deal, regardless of the fact that Tyson Campbell is 24 and Charvarius Ward, I believe, is entering his year 28 or 29 season, I'm still using that contract as a jumping off point, because Charvarius Ward is significantly better than Tyson Campbell, and will likely, I would assume, command a contract, maybe not exactly in that range, but very close. And so, like I said, I think ultimately what that contract does is really make it clear that you are only signing one of those guys. And again, if I'm betting money on it, I assume it's going to be Lenore, because he's the younger player, even though Ward is one of the, I would say, a top 5 corner in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I think even just asking something about the contract. I mean, he asked enough about Ayuk that you figured they weren't going to answer. Something about these contracts. Have you had any discussions? Are you prioritizing one over the other? Just something. Just introduce it. Just anything. And the next thing I would have followed up on in the Al Sacco press conference, Dre Greenlaw is a top 10 linebacker in the NFL. When he went off the field in the Super Bowl, your defense was just playing phenomenal, basically fell off a cliff, especially in pass coverage. He's going to go on the PUP, one of 4 players, and we'll talk about that. We're going to go on, which we expected. What's the timetable with him? And oh, by the way, he is also going to be a free agent. What's going on with him timetable wise? And then are you going to wait and see how healthy he is before talking about a contract? Is he a priority to extend? Again, that question was not asked, and that was one of the next things I had on my mind. Ask about Greenlaw. Is he going to be with the team next year? He's still young. Are you waiting on this injury? What's going on? And I don't feel like we got any clarification on that, or an opportunity to get clarification on that either.
And I think, the injury is what you want to know about. But the question I would pivot to is, how does this change your defense when Devondre Campbell is going to be his replacement? And Devondre Campbell is 2 years removed from being an All-Pro. But I think safe to say his play has declined. I mean, he would say that he was put in a bad spot, but I don't think you can overlook the fact that, you're hoping for a bounce back from this guy. And for the most part, what is this going to do to your defense? Because the 49ers struggled mightily against the run last season at many times, and it's hard to fathom that being the case when you have such a stout defensive line, especially, when Javon and Eric Armstead were there. It's how are you allowing this to happen? And we found out it's Steve Wilkes and the marriage to the coverage on the back end, all that stuff. But that's another question that you need to ask is, what does this look like now without Dre Greenlaw? Because we did get a glimpse of it in the Super Bowl, and you're not going to face Travis Kelce every week, but it just wasn't as good.
Well, and I think it's interesting that when they extended Greenlaw, when they did, it was a short extension, and I don't know if that was kind of salary cap maneuverings or whatever. I would assume possibly that's what we're looking at, but it certainly felt like, I don't want to say that they weren't ready to commit to him long term, but I don't know how else to take that other than, you only signed him to a 2-year extension when you did sign him. And so I would assume that they are likely waiting to see how he recovers, but it also might just be that they are just not going to be willing to pay what it's going to take to sign Dre Greenlaw long term based on his production. Because they don't want to pay 2 linebackers that much money, especially if they are looking to pivot to more of a nickel-based defense, because Dre's not even going to be on the field. And so I kind of wonder if they're just, they signed Devondre Campbell because he is good against the run. He's only going to be on the field on obvious rundowns, right? And then they'll move to a nickel look, if whether that's 3 safeties, whether that's Demo in the box as the nickel corner, whatever. I don't know that Dre is in their long-term plans, and that might be why there just hasn't been a whole lot of talk, regardless of the fact that he's incredible, and regardless of the fact that the defense did fall off in the Super Bowl, when he went out.
And then the fourth question I would ask is about Hufanga, who I'm not sure is in their long-term plans. I think Mustafa's there to replace him. That's sort of my take on it. But again, you did suffer. Like you said, Jay, the run defense was bad last year at times, and he makes plays, Hufanga, even though I don't think he was playing as well last season before he got hurt. He still makes a lot of plays. Is he going to be ready for week 1? And if he's not, what is your safety group going to look like? Is Mustafa going to get run with the ones? Where does George Odom fit in this? Are you going to play 3 safeties to make up for Greenlaw too? Is Ezekiel Turner going to be more of a safety? All these questions that could have been asked And I still don't know. I still don't know what to expect. And I feel like these questions needed to be asked. I feel like they still should be asked. And there are things that we have to find out. This is 4 starters on your defense: Hufanga, Greenlaw, Ward, and Lenore. You don't know they're going to be there next year. You can at least ask what's the plan. These are high impact guys. These aren't, replacement level starters. These are high impact dudes. Your best part of your defense this year might be your corners because of Lenore and Ward. They're both free agents. What's the plan? What's the plan with Hufanga? What's the plan with Greenlaw? What's the plan when they're out? None of it. It was just Ayuk. Really glad to have McCaffrey back. Huh? No shit. You shave your mustache, Kyle? Great. Who gives a shit? You know what I mean? It was like just things that I thought we needed to find out. I thought when I'm thinking about this press conference, I'm not there. I'm just an idiot with a podcast. But when I'm thinking about the conference, this is what I want to know from the coaching staff, from John Lynch moving forward. And I don't feel like we found any of it out.
Yeah, and these are just valid football questions, right? The drafting of Jair Brown, they have similar skill sets, Hufanga and him, right? Like ball hawks, the ball finds them. They play downhill. They have to work on their angles. Their skill sets are like aligned. The scouting report couldn't be any closer. And then, Tashawn Gibson is something that I wanted to bring up, like when we're talking about the safeties, because I do think, John Lynch talked about, hey, we're going to keep him in our plans. Now he's out for 6 weeks because of the PED thing. I think that's still somebody who, if they're not confident moving forward, they still can make that call. And I think that, Gibson, it's so funny, when Gibson was signed, it felt like an insurance policy for Jimmy Ward. And then they knocked Jimmy Ward down to nickel and he winds up staying for 2 years. So, and never underestimate the fact that the 49ers love their vets, right? More than they do wanting to play their guys, right? So the safety thing is real interesting. Jair Brown has to really take a stranglehold on this spot here, because they did draft him, pick 99. That's still a valuable pick, and they do believe in him, and you got to see what you have. And then it's interesting. Do you play Mustafa right away? Like, and again, Odom's still there, or do you look on the scrap heap? Which it almost felt like that's what they did with Tashawn Gibson, but he wound up sticking around for 2 years. So yeah, there's a lot of valid football questions. Another thing to ask: what happened to Ricky Pearsall? And it happened. We found out later on that it happened outside the building, which is why he's on the non-football injury list. It's a hamstring. So now Ricky Pearsall has a hamstring injury, which we know those things can linger. And all this talk about Ayuk, the one thing that we were saying was, or we were all happy about, is that this was going to be the deepest wide receiver room that they've had, regardless that Pearsall and Cowing have not taken a snap. You still feel better about the back end, right? Like, instead of Willie Snead or Chris Conley, or, coming off the bench, hey, let's give the rookies a look. But now Ricky Pearsall has a hamstring. If that lingers, it's bad for the timing, because you want him to get into the fold right away. And again, these are all just normal questions, not going after the head coach, not going after or being combative. It's literally just right there in front of you, football questions. So yeah, I was a little shocked by that too.
Yeah, to go back to Jair Brown, I just thought of this as we were talking about him. The thing that they kept saying after they drafted him was that was Wilkes's guy. Like, Wilkes wanted him bad, right? And then we know what happened with Steve Wilkes. I wonder if that automatically puts Jair Brown in a not a precarious situation. They're not going to get rid of him. He was a 3rd round pick, although they aren't scared to get rid of 3rd round picks, because apparently they know that they, for whatever reason, just can't draft players in the 3rd round. It's like the exact opposite of the 5th round. But Jair Brown played well at times last year. I think he's got to be the guy that they're penciling in to start. I think Mustafa is such a intriguing player to me. He looks like if Nick Bosa played safety. Like, that's what he's like, just a physical freak, and was a captain at Wake Forest, and was the guy that I think a lot of people looked at in this draft class and said, if there's a guy outside of Ricky Pearsall in round 1, right, here's the guy that might end up coming through and and really making a name for himself on this roster. I wouldn't be surprised if let me take that back. I think Brown and Mustafa are the two moving forward. When they drafted Hufanga in the 5th round, he was a gold helmet guy for what he did on the field, that he was a ball hawk, right? He was a demon on special teams and a leader on that team. And so they took him in the 5th round. But the reason that he went in the 5th round is because he's just not very athletic. And now you take that profile and you add an ACL tear to it and you go, I have literally no idea what to expect out of that player moving forward. And so I think at this point, they're just like, we're just going to let it play out. If he recovers and he plays like he did 2 years ago, then great. Maybe we start to look at extension talks, or maybe we look to trade him, or maybe we just play, let the season play out and then he's gone as a free agent. I don't know. The one name that is still out there as a free agent, you brought up Tayshaun Gibson again, suspended for 6 games if he does sign with anybody. So, I mean, if that is in the plan, you might as well sign him now so you can get those first 6 games out of the way, because the longer you wait, obviously, those 6 games don't start until he's signed by a team. Justin Simmons is still out there, guys. Justin Simmons is still a free agent. To me, that's the veteran move. Why they haven't gone that route, I don't know. Maybe again, they're just waiting. But I think safety is the biggest question on that defense, just out of not knowing who it's going to be. And then obviously the second one, and Al, you and I talked about this with John. Jason, you brought it up last season, stopping the run, the biggest deficiency on this defense. And we didn't get to the end of this offseason and think, hey, there's answers on the roster. That's still a big question mark for sure.
Yeah. And you brought up the Pearsall thing, Jay. Like, I'm a little worried about that. Hamstrings can linger. It was kind of like, well, we hope he's out for the first block, which, okay. So is he going to be back next week? Is he going to be back in 3 weeks? Is he going to be behind? That's worrisome too, especially if Ayuk does hold in, which I anticipate that's what he's going to do. He's there, but I don't suspect he's going to be on the field. We'll see. He might be, I guess, but I don't think so. So if Ayuk doesn't get training camp and then Pearsall doesn't get training camp, now where are we? So I don't know. And yeah, someone in the chat said he's out the first block, which is 4 days, but okay. Let's see what happens in 4 days, I guess, because hamstrings can linger. So I don't know. With that too, I was a little concerned about those two just getting on the field and being ready, when the season gets going.
Yeah, if it's 4 days, that's fine, because there's only going to be 4 days of practice this week, right? Starting today, if I'm not mistaken. But it is a little concerning because of the type of injury, right? And those things can get there. And then we have to figure out what he is right now. Everyone loves the pick, right? Because they think he's a smooth route runner, and he's, they see the vision and everything. And then they see, mini camp against air. Like, we're not going to find out who this guy is until the pads start popping. Until, can he beat press, right? Can he beat this and that? Like, I've seen it on tape in college, but I want to see it here. So that's another thing. I mean, look, again, we're probably spinning our wheels. If it's 4 days, it's nothing. But it is a hamstring injury, and it's not optimal. I was a Yankee fan like me. It's like, what is it that Aaron Boone always says? It's not what you want. It's not what you want, right? Like, and everything is, it's not what you want. Hey, your team lost 12-1. Yeah, it's not what you want. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Like that's kind of just where we are right now at this point. But again, I think furthermore to finding out what he is building that rapport, right? And this is the part with the Ayuk thing that is troubling is Nick Bosa went out of his way to say, yeah, I wasn't fully right, early on because I missed camp. This team has Super Bowl aspirations. Like, they have to kick that door down. So it's a soft landing spot early in the schedule, but you want to see this thing get rolling right away. Like, I don't need the 49ers to stumble out of the gate with like a win, but you look lethargic, no, you need to get out here when you face the Vikings, blitz them. And I don't want to see like a close game or anything like that. You're much better than them. Start that from the beginning, like start to impose your will in that way. So a lot of that has to do with the fact that Ayuk has to get right back in there and all these guys are ready. So again, we could be, again, an Ayuk deal can come through while we're talking and then it'll be moot from here. But I don't want this to linger through training camp, possibly into the season or anything like that in terms of the Ayuk thing. And then with Pearsall, I just want him to build rapport. I just want to see who he is so I can understand the type of football player he's going to be for the 49ers.
I think, we did start I started the show with a little tongue in cheek, but one of the biggest news of the day is the fact that Brandon Ayuk did report to training camp today, which is huge based on really when last week ended, it really seemed like it was the nuclear option for him, which was, I'm just not showing up until this deal gets done. So that is big. I think the fact that he showed up shows good faith on both sides that something will get done. I feel like that is, that is a good sign. Even if John Lynch, when asked if he has completely ruled out trading Brandon Ayuk, he said there are no absolutes. We don't even know if we're going to be alive tomorrow, right, Kyle?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously no absolutes, but the fact that he's showing up is big, because like you said, Jay, we really need to know what the plan is for Ricky Pearsall. And Kyle's offense has an X and a Z, right? The X is Brandon Ayuk, the Z is Deebo Samuel. Is Ricky Pearsall more of a Z? Matt Harmon from Reception Perception believes that he is. That if, and this came up, oh man, my light fell. This came up when this came up when it was talking about possibly trading Brandon Ayuk in the offseason. Matt Harmon came out and basically said, like, Ricky Pearsall is not going to replace Brandon Ayuk. He's not a traditional X wide receiver. He's a Z in my mind. Matt Harmon really liked Ricky Pearsall's film and believes that he's going to be a good fit. But he thinks that essentially he's a replacement for Deebo. So it will be interesting to see if he can get into camp soon and start working with the offense. Where is he working? Is he working those traditional Deebo routes? Is he working some of those X routes? Where is he? Is he slot only? Does Kyle Shanahan think he has his version of Cooper Kupp? We don't really know any of these answers. That's why, camp is going to be exciting. But like you said, a hamstring injury is not what you want. Not what you want. Soft tissue injuries with 49ers wide receivers have had a history of tragedy and disaster and gnashing of teeth. So I don't know what to expect, but like you said, Al and I have talked about, this team is an offense first team now. They were a defense first team until, I would argue, last year. But they are now an offense first team. And if this offense is going to sputter coming out of the gate, that's going to spell bad news for this team for sure.
Yeah. And I just think, the frustration isn't with the Niners. They're going to figure out what they're going to figure out. And they're doing things behind the scenes. Just, as a fans, we want to kind of know what the next window is going to look like. What are your plans? Let's get a peek into that, because you do have to pay Purdy, and Bosa's making a ton of money. And if you pay Ayuk, well, now there's decisions to be made. And what guys are going to come back? What guys are going to prioritize? Are Green and Luter people that you expect to step up? So you're going to lose one of these corners. So I guess that's just where the frustration was to me. I was waiting for some of these questions to get asked today, and they just didn't. And I was like, oh, okay, like, is that not important? And I don't feel like some of the stuff has been covered really at all. It's like it's glanced over. But to me, the future of Dre Greenlaw and Travarius Ward and Lenore, those are huge stories to me. A little bit less with Hufanga, because I know he was an All-Pro a couple of years ago, but I feel he's maybe a little bit more replaceable than those other three guys. Even Aaron Banks, he's a free agent. He's your starting guard. I feel like these stories, there needs to be more emphasis put on them instead of just Ayuk. That's all it's been this offseason.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is that's what the people want to hear about, right? It was a surprise today when I got the Schefter bomb or the Rappaport bomb on my phone, and it said that he was gonna, report, and that sounds all well and good, but for sure it feels like a hold in. I wonder if he's gonna do wind sprints behind practice like Jimmy Garoppolo, to a bunch of applause, because I'll never forget that camp. What a crazy time to be there. But it is interesting for all of these things, and there's still more questions to ask. Like, I would have asked about, hey, you drafted Cam Latu. But you've gone out of your way to tell us that you want every other tight end under the sun to be the second tight end, as opposed to the guy that you redshirted essentially last year with an injury. Even Braden Willis got time, but you flirted with Brock Wright. You signed Soybert. You signed Logan Thomas. You're literally telling us, without telling us, that you don't think Cam Latu is going to be there. And then, let alone, Kyle Shanahan was literally, when asked about Cam Latu, was no, like angry about even being asked that question. So there's a lot to try to figure out here on this roster that could have been asked. Again, these aren't questions that are combative. They're not trying to stir the pot. These are pure just football questions. It's not conspiracy theory, anything like that. So it is interesting that everything focuses on Ayuk. But again, yeah, I'm with Al here. The Shannon stash was cool while we had it. Like, that's good for memes and stuff. I call them a James Bond villain. but I don't care. Like now it's training camp, right? You know, like that was us trying to fill off-season content. The offseason's over. You know, all your guys are reported today. So now you can start to dig into these questions and figure out what's going on. And a little bit more to Al's point, this next window, the Super Bowl window, I think it's Steve Young that said it. The Super Bowl window doesn't close. It either widens or it gets more narrow. And the jerseys on the back are going to change, right? Like, I think we all know, like, obviously, Trent Williams is at the end of his career. It does feel like Pearsall's here to replace Debo and not Ayuk. It does feel like there's a changing of the guard when it comes to corners, which is why that the secondary moves that they were making in terms of, you know, Isaac Gideon and Rock Ya-Sin behind all of these other draft picks, it does feel like this team is about to have a little bit of turnover just based on the fact that, you know, you can't pay everybody and all these other guys do deserve to get paid. So, yeah, this is such an interesting season for the 49ers because every year is Super Bowl or bust for this team, but it feels like Super Bowl or bust for this group. And as long as Shanahan and Purdy are there, the window will stay. It will always stay. But the names on the back, Williams, Kittle, you know, Greenlaw, Hufanga, we don't know who's going to be here and who won't. And I think that's what makes this season so interesting. It's not a last dance for the 49ers. It's just this current group.
Oh, did we lose Brian? You still there?
I think he's muted.
Brian, we cannot hear you.
Brian, you're muted.
Can't hear you, Brian.
There we go. Tell me that this guy. Tell me that this guy was not auditioning to play Jeff Fisher in the Jeff Fisher biopic. No more 7 and 9 bullshit. Like, look, I mean, he looks just like Jeff Fisher. It's wild.
Look at this drip. Like, it literally looks like he has James Bond locked up with the ray going to like get him. Like, it's so good. Like, I think it's between that and the guy from Reno 911. It looks so good. It almost
Officer Dangle.
Yeah, new boot goofing. It feels like he's like, man, what's the one thing separating me from Andy Reid? And he can't get the belly, so he's like, oh, the mustache. He should have just kept it.
Well, give him time. If he keeps losing Super Bowls, he might get the belly. He may turn into a villain. Maybe this is his like turn. And that's the other thing I want to ask you guys about is, you know, a lot of pressure on Purdy this year, right? Okay, well, is Purdy going to have another good year? And all the stuff on the players and the Niners. But there's a lot on Kyle right now in terms of his legacy. And I was thinking about it today. I don't know that any coordinator in the history, at least that I could think of, has taken as much shit for a Super Bowl loss and as much blame as Shanahan did when he was with Atlanta. Seriously, he gets blamed for that more than Dan Quinn does. It seems that way anyway.
Nobody.
It's like all on Kyle. And when you look at Kyle now, of Super Bowl coaches who have lost more than one Super Bowl and not won any, okay, Shanahan's 0-2. People act like he's 0-3 because they blame the other one on him. Wow. John Fox 0-2. Marv Levy 0-4. Dan Reeves 0-4. Bud Grant 0-4. So Kyle right now is grouped in with those other 4 coaches. For such a great coach, it's almost been tragic in terms of how he's lost some of these games. We know the Atlanta one that he wasn't a head coach, but 28-3, one of the worst losses ever. He blows a 10-point lead in the Super Bowl in 2000. He doesn't blow, but the team blows a 10-point lead in the Super Bowl in 2019. And then what other things that happened last year, you know, he's never going to live down the coin toss in overtime. And whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it didn't work out. And it's just been a history of things late in games, the decisions that haven't worked out. And there's just a lot on his legacy right now. Look, if the Niners ever fired Kyle, not that they would, he'd be out of work for about 15 seconds. Somebody would hire him. He's a top 5 coach, at least in the league, for sure. He's a tremendous coach. If he gets a Super Bowl, you might be talking Hall of Fame coach with him. You can almost lock in at this point 10, 12 wins with this team. But in terms of elite coach, when we talk elite coaches and his legacy, this is a big year for him too.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, look, the Dan Quinn thing is, it escapes me, right? So let's live in this alternate universe where the Atlanta Falcons don't blow a 28-3 lead. And we get to the podium and they bring out the Lombardi and they run it right to Dan Quinn, and Kyle Shanahan doesn't even get seen on the screen, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So Dan Quinn would have gotten all the credit, but he gets none of the blame. And by the way, Kyle Shanahan doesn't instruct that defense. You're a defensive head coach. You needed to get one stop. I understand your defense was tired. I understand it's Tom Brady. But for so much of this to just be Kyle Shanahan's fault because he didn't run the ball or whatever it is, that's fine. But it's way easier to just put it all on him when you weren't going to give him any of the credit. When the game was over, you would have seen Dan Quinn holding up the trophy and it'd have been like, oh, what a great coach. Really, Kyle's offense was the real engine. But in terms of now, like, I think there's always something to point to with each loss, right? Every single loss, right? We can point to like these critical moments, turning points and everything, even, down to the Rams NFC Championship game. It is going to be a stain until he erases it. And I think that's all he has to do. Last year, he did a great job busting a bunch of narratives, right? Can't come back from 10 points. Can't come back from halftime. Okay, well, we did that twice. And then the goalpost moves to, oh, well, he still hasn't come back from 8 in the fourth quarter. Yeah, they were about to take the lead in the fourth quarter. They were still down, however, against the Lions at half. So the goalposts like move, and there's this strange group of people, fans and analysts alike, who like the idea that Kyle Shanahan can't get it done, who like the idea of being able to pile on him about that. And I just find it weird. I think when you look around, and we could probably go through the list of teams, whether you're running everything Shanahan or you're just running some of the stuff, his fingerprints and that offense is everywhere, right now. It is literally the norm. So yes, great coach, just hasn't gotten it done. And I was absolutely right. You can go through the list of teams and literally, even if it was today, right now, and they were starting their training camp and they have something building, you don't think that the Indianapolis Colts would send Shane Steichen packing and just say, hey, we're going to pair you with Anthony Richardson, Kyle, get in here, and we're going to start right now. Like, that's the thing. And then it's only like 4 or 5 legacy guys that he's not going to replace. Like, he's not going to replace Tomlin, not going to replace Harbaugh, Andy Reid. I think Miami would stick with Mike McDaniel. There's other, like Houston would stick with DeMeco. But everybody else, like Brian Dabble, you're gone. McCarthy, you're out. Sirianni, you're out. Like we're going to move right into this. So, again, great coach, just has to get it done. But unfair blame, like, for a lot of things. Not necessarily all the 49ers things, but that 28-3 thing, that bothers the hell out of me.
Well, and speaking of that 28-3 thing, here's the other thing. Dan Quinn was the head coach of that team. Kyle Shanahan showed in this past Super Bowl, even though he's in charge of the offense, he stepped in and said, wait a second, Steve, I don't like what you're doing here. Let's change it. Dan Quinn at any point could have stepped in and been like, Kyle, run the goddamn ball. And Kyle would have had to run the ball. But Dan Quinn did not do that. So again, let's step away and be like, the head coach is the CEO of the team. Just like any business, if it fails, it falls on your shoulders, not your CFO, not your, whatever the case may be, right? And so, like I said, Kyle Shanahan proved in this past Super Bowl as the head coach, even if you are quote unquote in charge of only one side of the ball, you're still the head coach of the whole team. And if you don't like what that side of the ball is doing, you got to step in and say something. Kyle Shanahan did. Dan Quinn didn't. So let's get off Kyle's nuts about 28-3. It is not his fault. It is not his fault. Okay. Let's step past that. The same can't be said though for the 2 Chiefs losses, right? Because he's the head coach. Yep. Those fall on him. 28-3 does not. Let's put that narrative to bed. But like you said, Jason, I mean, if you fire Kyle Shanahan, there's maybe 8 teams that aren't just going to be absolutely knocking down his door to sign him immediately. So is Kyle Shanahan infallible? No. Are there things that I wish he was better at? Absolutely. Does he have room to grow? 100%. Are any of the beat reporters going to ask him about those areas? No, they will not. We've already talked about that. But,
I know a guy. I know a guy who will.
and that guy did ask a question, and Kyle said, Kyle basically was like, God, I hate this guy. And it's because he's the only one that's willing to ask those questions.
I love Kyle's face every time Grant asks him a question.
I love Grant
just
so
a death
much.
stare.
And I think for this one time, Grant didn't ask anything that was like inflammatory. He just asked a football question, and that
was a good question.
It comes across Kyle's face immediately that he's just like, oh my God.
Well, it wasn't really a football question. It was like, you said this about so-and-so. And then Kyle was like, Oh, I don't know if I said it exactly that way.
Oh yeah, he did.
Like,
the first part of it was good though. He asked about why,
yeah,
or was it two separate questions? I don't remember, but he asked why do you wait so long to do the contract? And I thought that was a great question.
And, that's a great question.
And Lynch was like, "Well, I'm impatient. I don't want to do that. So I don't know if that's just the way things have played out. I don't know if that's a high, above their pay grade type decision where it's, Jed York or Marathe or wherever they want to wait. I'm not sure what that is, but that was a good question because again, you're paying for it with Ayuk. You paid for it the past few seasons where your stars got in late and started slowly. And I think you're about to pay for it with the corners too. Trent Baalke keeps giving out these ridiculous contracts. And now you have to figure it out with these other guys. So pay for it in the sense, I mean, they haven't lost anyone really other than Buckner that you'd want to keep around, but pay for it in the sense that you're spending more money now. Not that we give a shit, but in terms of the structure of the team and everything like that. And some of these guys are getting in late, and it's affecting early in the season. Nick Bosa was not right for the second half of the season.
All three of them, Kittle, Debo, and Bosa, all had their worst years since their rookie year. The season that they held out and waited too long for the extension. All three of them.
Yep.
Yeah,
so,
and we'll
see.
No, you got it all. It just feels like this time their strategy really backfired because with Bosa, there was no other defensive end that was ready to get paid that same time, right? Same thing with Warner, same thing with Kittle. Like there weren't guys that could reset the market. Now, when you're waiting around for Ayuk, all these guys start getting their deals. Like when Ayuk looks at Jalen Waddle and says, "How much did you get?" We have the same amount of numbers. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, how much did Devonta Smith get? And then Cleveland gives this ridiculous amount of money to Jerry Jeudy, and it's just and now and this is what he talked about on the Pivot podcast. So this time it really got to them because when it was with Bosa, there was no other defensive end who could reset the market or change things, right? They had the number in mind. Bosa was going to be the highest paid, and they were going to get that done. Same thing with Fred. Same thing with Kittle. Debo wanted his money. And by the way, Debo asked for a contract after a season in which he carried the 49ers in his backpack. I am talking about one of the most offensive, dominant seasons we've seen from a wide receiver not named Jerry Rice in every single way. Like I can still see Debo finishing off that Green Bay game, like with his foot, and he's just hammered hurt. But that's a good time to go ask for it. Brandon Ayuk hasn't done that. And I understand that the parameters of the offense it doesn't lead to that. Obviously, they lean on Christian McCaffrey. But man, when Debo Samuel wanted to get paid, that was one of the greatest seasons I've seen from a wide receiver not named Jerry Rice or Terrell Owens. And that made a lot of sense. But when it comes to how long they waited, I think a little bit of their process is starting to understand what the 53-man roster is going to look like and where you're going to start making your cuts, right? Because we all thought Nate Sudfeld is going to be here. That's number 2 money. Well, nope, now you're out, because we have Jimmy Garoppolo and we have this kid named Purdy. I think they start looking around and trying to see what they want to roll over, which is another big thing. So I think the 49ers are looking to kind of get a clearer view of their cap, how much they're going to roll over, which is going to have to go to signing Purdy and everybody else, and how much is the cap going to increase also. So right. I think they're playing like the long game with this, but this time it bit them because of all the other signings, like, Devonta Smith and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think this is the first time that they've had to encounter something like that.
I also think I don't mean this is going to come out probably worse than I mean it, but I don't think they care about Ayuk like they do some of those other guys. So Bosa is elite top. I said this a couple shows ago. Elite top 1-2 at his position. Kittle, elite 1-2 at his position. Warner, elite 1-2 at his position. And you said Debo just came off a season where 1, he carried them. 2, he's kind of a 1-of-1 for what he does. And they weren't really paying a quarterback at the time. They assumed Lance was still going to be on his rookie contract. Now, I don't think they see Ayuk as elite like that or a 1-of-1. They see him as a really, really good player, and we'd love to have you, but we'd love to have you here. We're not going to pay you elite because we just don't think you are. That's the way I see him. They love him, and they think he's really, 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 really good, but he's not the top 1-2 elite type guy. That's the way I see it.
Real quick, the 49ers are doing something that's objectively hilarious, in my opinion. It's looking at your production and throwing it back in your face as to why, this is why we can't give you, right? It's we're all trying to find the guy who did this. It's literally the guy in the hot dog suit. That's you. Like how frustrating is it for Brandon Ayuk for them to say, hey, I don't know if we can pay you that much. You only cost 77 balls. Well, throw me the fucking ball more. I mean, I'm sorry.
Right.
Curse like that. Like, it's just like he's literally looking at them like that's got to be the crux of his frustration. And I don't blame him. And I understand, again, McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle, right? Like you have all these weapons, But for them to throw his production back in his face as if they're not the ones that hold that in their hands, especially with how good Purdy and Ayuk's connection is, it's gotta be the most frustrating thing for Ayuk.
Yeah, you put Ayuk on the Bills, he probably has 115 catches this year.
Easy.
So.
Yeah. There's quite a few teams where he goes to them and they, he is a top 5 fantasy wide receiver just through volume in and of itself. But yeah, he'll be here.
All right, Jay, we got to get out of here, but tell everybody where they can find you, because I know you're involved in a million different things. So.
Oh, appreciate you guys for having me. This is always fun, man. Shout out to Al, shout out to Brian, shout out to David, 49ers Web Zone alum, like we're all from the same stuff. But yeah, you guys can find me. Niners Nation is where I write. Sprint Right Option Podcast, Bully Ball Podcast on Gold Standard Podcast Network, and my own YouTube channel. I usually just do shows. I'm back in the saddle now because I can't take the redundant and repetitive talking about like Brandon Ayuk. But funny enough, the show's probably going to be about comparing Brandon Ayuk and CeeDee Lamb because both their reception perception profiles just dropped. So like we can have a little fun with that. But yeah, that's where you can find me, guys.
Love it.
All right, thanks everybody for listening. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Thanks everybody.
Later.